In the summer of 1716, the Ottoman Empire marched north with 150,000 soldiers, convinced it would crush the Habsburgs and reconquer Hungary in a single campaign. Its janissaries were invincible, its cavalry was unstoppable, its Grand Vizier was the Sultan's son-in-law, but on the banks of the Danube, before a fortress called Petrovaradin, a man awaited them who had defeated empires before, a man who knew the secrets of war better than any commander of his age. And when the sun rose over the plains of Sirmia, the silence shattered. Artillery roared from the ramparts. Cavalry descended like an iron hammer. The janissaries, who had penetrated the Austrian center, suddenly found themselves trapped between two wings of steel. The Grand Vizier charged at the head of his guard, sword raised high, but a bullet pierced him through. Standards fell, cannons changed hands, dust rose so high it darkened the sky, and when it finally settled, 20,000 Ottomans lay dead upon the earth. The empire that had made Europe tremble for centuries had just been shattered by an army half its size. And the echo of that morning would resonate from Vienna to Constantinople, announcing that the destiny of the world had changed forever. In the early 18th century, Europe breathed beneath the shadow of an empire that seemed eternal. For more than 3 centuries, the Ottoman Empire had expanded its borders from the shores of the Red Sea to the gates of Vienna. Its armies had conquered Constantinople, subjugated the Balkans, subdued Hungary. Generation after generation, the sultans had dreamed of a world where the crescent would wave above every Christian city. But that dream had cracked. In 1699, the Treaty of Karlowitz had forced the empire to cede much of Hungary to the Habsburgs, a humiliation no sultan had forgotten. For 17 years, the Ottomans had waited for the moment to take revenge, to recover what was lost, to prove that their glory had not died. That moment came in 1716. Sultan Mehmed IV appointed his son-in-law Damat Ali Pasha as Grand Vizier and entrusted him with a simple but monumental mission: march north, destroy the Habsburg army, reconquer Hungary, and open the road to Vienna. Damat Ali was ambitious, disciplined, and completely convinced that destiny was on his side. He had never commanded a campaign against the reformed European forces, but he trusted in numbers. The empire could gather armies so vast they darkened the horizon. The Habsburgs could not. In early 1716, Damat Ali assembled his army in Belgrade, 40,000 white-turbaned janissaries, the empire's elite, 20,000 sipahis, the fearsome armored cavalry that had crushed the Crusaders at Nicopolis, 10,000 Tatars from the steppes, riders who could vanish like smoke and reappear when least expected, and behind them an ocean of auxiliaries, engineers, artillerymen, porters, in total 150,000 men or more, according to some chroniclers. It was the largest army the empire had, mobilized in decades. Its drums resonated day and night, its standards waved like a green sea, and when they crossed the Sava River in July and began advancing north along the right bank of the Danube, it seemed nothing in the world could stop them. On the other side of the river, another man watched the horizon with eyes that had seen too many wars. His name was Eugene of Savoy, a prince born in France, but who had found his destiny in the service of the Habsburgs. He was 53 years old. His face was thin, almost fragile, but his mind was steel-tempered in 1,000 battles. He had defeated the Turks at Zenta in 1697, crushing an Ottoman army of 80,000 men with only 50,000 soldiers. He had fought in Italy, Spain, the Netherlands. He knew how war worked. And he knew that the Ottomans, for all their numbers, had a weakness. They trusted too much in the weight of their masses and not in the speed of their thinking. When Damat Ali crossed the Sava and began advancing toward the fortress of Petrovaradin, Eugene made a decision that would change everything. He would not wait for the Ottomans to surround him. He would not hide behind the walls. He would strike first. He gathered his army, approximately 60 to 70,000 soldiers, including German infantry, Hungarian cavalry, Croatian dragoons, and Serbian hussars. It was not a large army, but it was disciplined, well-trained, and led by officers who understood modern warfare. Eugene knew he could not win with numbers, but he could win with coordination. He could use the terrain. He could exploit the enemy's arrogance. And he knew that the fortress of Petrovaradin, built upon a rocky promontory overlooking the Danube, was more than a simple fortification. It was a living artillery platform, capable of raining fire upon any army that approached too close. The Ottomans called it the Gibraltar of the Danube, and with good reason. Its walls were thick, its bastions high, and its garrison of 8,000 Serbs was ready to defend every stone. Eugene established his camp within the fortress and waited, not with fear, but with patience. He knew Damat Ali would come, and when he arrived, Eugene would be ready. On August 2nd, the world began to shrink. Austrian reconnaissance patrols led by Count Palffy encountered the Ottoman vanguard near Karlovci. It was not a battle, it was a trap. 20,000 Sipahi horsemen enveloped the Austrians. For 4 hours, Palffy's dragoons and cuirassiers fought desperately, repelling charge after charge, but in the end they were forced to retreat with 700 casualties. Among the wounded was Count Siegfried von Breuner, whose horse fell beneath him. A cuirassier immediately dismounted, offered him his mount, and died moments later under a Turkish saber. Breuner barely escaped, but was captured later while trying to break through the encirclement. Damat Ali, feeling triumphant, demanded the surrender of the fortress. The message reached Eugene that same night. The prince read it in silence, then let it fall upon the table. He did not respond with words. He responded with action. He summoned his commanders to a council of war. Inside a tent lit by oil lamps, with maps spread across wooden tables, Eugene traced his plan. He would not wait for the Ottomans to dig trenches and establish a prolonged siege. He would attack at dawn, before the enemy could fully organize, taking advantage of the fact that the Ottoman forces were still scattered across the hills. Some of his officers doubted. The numbers were overwhelming. The Janissaries were legendary. But Eugene spoke calmly and with conviction, reminding them of Zenta, reminding them that war was not won with crowds, but with decision. During the night of August 4th to 5th, the Austrian army crossed the Danube by pontoon bridges. The river whispered beneath their feet. Fog crawled over the waters, covering every movement. 50,000 infantry, 27,000 cavalry, 80 cannons. They moved in absolute silence, each man knowing that at dawn, everything would change. On the other side, on the hills rising before Petrovaradin, the Ottoman army waited. Not with fear, but with confidence. They had come to crush a rebellion, to subdue a fortress, to prove that the empire was still invincible. 30,000 Janissaries had already begun digging trenches before the walls. The Sipahis waited in formation, their lances gleaming under the moonlight. The Tatars patrolled the flanks, and in the center, Damat Ali Pasha, wearing his green silk robe embroidered in gold, watched the fortress in the distance. He did not know it was already too late. He did not know his enemy had already crossed the river. And he did not know that when the sun rose, the fate of his empire would be at stake. The dawn of August 5th, 1716, arrived with a dense white fog that crawled over the plains like a shroud. The air was still. Birds did not sing, and in that silence, 60,000 men waited for the order to kill or die. At 7 in the morning, Eugene gave the signal. War drums resonated from the Austrian trenches. Trumpets tore through the silence. And from the river, 6 frigates of the Danube fleet opened fire with their cannons, hurling iron balls toward the Ottoman positions on Nis, the hills. The thunder was deafening. The attack had begun. The Austrian right wing, commanded by Prince Alexander of Württemberg, advanced toward the Ottoman trenches with methodical fury. German infantry marched in close formation, their muskets ready, their bayonets gleaming. The Janissaries responded with volleys of fire, but the Austrians did not stop. They scaled the trenches, crashed against the palisades, fought hand-to-hand in the mud. Württemberg captured a battery of 10 cannons in the first minutes of combat. The left wing, under Count Palfy's command, charged against the Ottoman cavalry. Austrian cuirassiers, armor gleaming, sabers raised high, crashed into the Sipahis in a clash of metal and flesh. Horses shrieked, men screamed. The Ottoman cavalry, for all its reputation, broke under the onslaught and fled the field. But in the center, everything stopped. The Austrian advance stalled before a compact mass of 40,000 Janissaries. They were the empire's elite, trained from childhood to obey, fight, and die without ever retreating. They wore white tunics, high turbans, and carried long muskets and curved yataghans. When General Starhemberg attempted to break through their line, the Janissaries repelled him like a wave breaking against a rock. The Austrian infantry fell back. General Heister launched a second assault, supported by cuirassiers. Again, the Janissaries resisted, and when the Austrian lines began to break, the Janissaries saw their opportunity. They advanced. They pushed forward, toward the heart of Eugene's army, convinced they could break the center and divide the enemy forces in two. It was the mistake Eugene had been waiting for. As they advanced, the Janissaries exposed both flanks. From his command post in the fortress, Eugene saw the moment with absolute clarity. He gave 3 simultaneous orders. First, he sent General Ebergenyi's cavalry to attack the Janissaries' left flank. Second, he ordered Württemberg's battalions to turn inward and attack the right flank, supported by cuirassiers. Third, he sent General Löffelholz's reserve to reinforce the center that was now advancing again. And in that moment, the battle became an execution. Ebergenyi's cavalry fell upon the Ottoman left flank like a hammer. The Janissaries, fighting at the front, could not turn in time. Austrian cuirassiers struck them from both sides, crushing formations, breaking lines. The fortress cannons, elevated above the battlefield, began firing with deadly precision, tearing through the Turkish ranks. And then Palfy did something no one had anticipated. With his cavalry, he threw himself behind the Ottoman lines, blocking the escape route to the south. The Janissaries, the empire's most feared force, suddenly found themselves surrounded. Ahead, Austrian infantry. Behind, Palfy's cavalry. On both sides, Eugene's cuirassiers and dragoons. And from above, the fortress artillery. They fought with desperation. Some tried to break the encirclement, dying under bayonets. Others tried to flee, falling under horses' hooves. The lines disintegrated. Order became chaos. The cries of the wounded mixed with the thunder of cannons. Smoke thickened so much that sunlight barely penetrated the grey fog. And in that inferno, Damat Ali Pasha mounted his horse and threw himself forward. He could not accept defeat. He could not return to Constantinople with the shame of having lost. He charged at the head of his personal guard, sword unsheathed, shouting orders no one could hear. But it was already too late. A bullet, fired from somewhere in the confusion, pierced him through. He fell from his horse. His men tried to protect him, but were overwhelmed by the tide of Austrian cuirassiers. The Grand Vizier, the Sultan's son-in-law, commander of 150,000 men, died in the mud of a foreign field. And with him died the Ottoman dream of reconquering Europe. When the clock struck 2 in the afternoon, the battlefield fell silent. The fog began to dissipate, revealing a scene of devastation that seemed drawn from the end of the world. The ground was covered with bodies. Janissaries in white tunics stained with red. Sipahis crushed beneath their dead horses. Tatars who would never return to the steppes. Weapons lay scattered like leaves after a storm. broken muskets, bent swords, lances planted in the earth. 250 Ottoman cannons, which had been Damat Ali's hope, now belonged to the Habsburgs. 20,000 Ottomans had died. Thousands more were wounded, captured, or scattered across the surrounding hills. Of those who managed to escape, barely 50,000 returned to Belgrade, hungry, demoralized, defeated. The Austrians had paid a price too. 3,695 common soldiers dead, 469 fallen officers. Among the wounded were Palffy, Württemberg, and Eugene himself, who had been struck by a bullet in the thigh, his 13th war wound. But still, they had won. And they had not just won a battle. They had proven something Europe had forgotten, that the Ottomans could be defeated, that their numbers did not make them invincible, that discipline and strategy could overcome brute force. Eugene remained in the fortress for hours after the battle ended, silently watching the field where he had changed history. There were no celebrations, there were no triumphant speeches, only a tired man, bleeding, observing the consequences of his decisions. That night, Austrian engineers began counting the spoils of war. 166 cannons, 150 standards, 9 horsetails, the symbols of high rank of Ottoman commanders, and the Grand Vizier's war chest, filled with gold destined to pay troops that no longer existed. In Belgrade, news of the defeat arrived like an earthquake. Survivors entered the city in silence, covered in dust and blood, not looking anyone in the eye. The Sultan, when he received the report, tore his robes and wept. Then he sent a messenger. The messenger carried a silk cord. It was the sign of royal justice. Damat Ali Pasha was already dead, but his memory would be punished anyway. His body was buried in the Belgrade fortress, in a tomb that would later be known as Damat Ali Pashino Turbe. Upon the hill where the battle had taken place, the Habsburgs built a church in honor of Our Lady of the Snows. It was a special church with both Catholic and Orthodox altars because Serbs, Croats, Hungarians, and Germans had fought together that day. And every August 5th for centuries, pilgrims would climb that hill to remember the day Europe stopped retreating. But the Battle of Petrovaradin was only the beginning. Eugene did not stop. With the resources captured from the Ottoman army, he marched south toward the Banat, the last region of Hungary that still remained under Turkish control. 21 days after Petrovaradin, his army appeared before the walls of Temesvar, a fortress that had been in Ottoman hands since 1552. The siege lasted 43 days. The Ottoman garrison, led by Bodor Mustafa Pasha, resisted valiantly, but without reinforcements, without hope, and surrounded by an army that had just shattered 150,000 men. They had no chance. On October 16th, 1716, Temesvar surrendered. When Eugene entered the city, Mustafa Pasha, in a gesture of gratitude for having been allowed to withdraw without being massacred, gave him a horse. The prince accepted it in silence. 1 year later, Eugene marched toward Belgrade. The city fell on August 18, 1717, after another bloody battle in which Eugene, once again, defeated superior forces. For the first time in centuries, a Christian army had penetrated deep into Ottoman territory. And in 1718, when the Treaty of Passarowitz was signed, the map of Europe had changed. The Habsburgs controlled the Banat, Belgrade, and parts of Serbia. The Venetians recovered territories in Dalmatia, and the Ottoman Empire, which had ruled from the desert to the Carpathians, began to retreat. It would never again threaten Vienna. It would never again march north with the confidence of conquering Europe. Petrovaradin was not just a victory, it was the turning point. The moment when an empire stopped growing and began to die. Centuries later, the battlefield of Petrovaradin still exists. The fortress remains standing, its walls looking toward the Danube, its rusted cannons pointing toward hills that once trembled under the weight of 150,000 soldiers. Below its bastions, the city of Novi Sad grew, vibrant and modern, but the memory of that morning never disappeared. Every August 5th, pilgrims climb to the Church of Our Lady of the Snows, light candles and whisper prayers for those who died on both sides, not to glorify war, but to remember what it cost. In Vienna, in the halls of power, the name of Eugene of Savoy became legend. Poets wrote about him, painters portrayed him. Children grew up hearing stories of the prince who saved Europe with only 60,000 men, but Eugene himself never boasted. When asked how he had defeated such a large army, he simply replied, "Discipline overcomes numbers, and patience overcomes haste." He died in 1736, at 73 years old, having served 3 emperors and fought in more than 100 battles. He never married, he never had children. His life was war, and when he died, Europe lost the last of the great commanders of its era. But his legacy lived on. Petrovaradin proved that empires are not invincible, that crowds do not guarantee victory, and that a single man with a clear vision can change the course of history. The Ottoman Empire never forgot that lesson. During the next 2 centuries, it slowly withdrew from Europe, losing territory after territory until it finally collapsed after World War I. And Europe, which had lived for centuries under the shadow of the Crescent, breathed free. Today, when historians look back at the wars that defined the destiny of nations, Petrovaradin occupies a special place. It was not the largest battle, it was not the bloodiest, but it was the most perfect. It was the moment when strategy defeated force, when discipline defeated chaos, when a small army proved that courage and intelligence are worth more than 1,000 cannons. And when the sun sets over the Danube and golden light bathes the fortress walls, you can still hear the echo of that morning, the roar of cannons, the thunder of hooves, the cries of janissaries trapped between steel, and the calm voice of a prince who changed the world with a single word: attack.